This is Kim Meyer, host of Choose to Rise. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Food for Thought podcast. I am your host, Kylie Thompson. Our guest this week is Melody Pierce, Miss Phoenix 2020. She was such a delight to talk to. I learned all about her journey to becoming an eating disorder recovery coach, which was something I'd never heard about, and how you can cope with COVID-19 while trying to maintain your eating disorder recovery as well, which was another thing I found really helpful because, you know, I'm kind of struggling a little bit with my eating disorder and falling into old disordered eating habits in the middle of COVID. Just being at home all the time has been a little bit hard for me, and getting to sit down and chat with her about how we can all maintain proper mental health and continue feeding our bodies and minds with good things in the midst of this pandemic was really helpful. So without further ado, let's get into the episode with Melody Pierce. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food for Thought. Today, I have Miss Phoenix 2020 Melody Pierce with me. Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm so good. How are you?
I'm good. I've been fangirling over doing this interview just because, I don't know, doing interviews with girls from other states is really awesome, and I love getting to connect with people this way. So I'm really excited that you're here.
Me too.
Perfect. So we'll just dive right in, and why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, whether it's pageant or social impact related or not. What do people need to know about you?
Well, I am Miss Phoenix 2020, as you said, so I will be competing for Miss Arizona in the near future. We're not entirely sure when yet, but hopefully very soon.
Sure. When would the competition usually be?
It was the third week of June.
Okay, yeah, that was what Wisconsin is too.
So we're not entirely sure when our competition will be rescheduled for, but obviously it'll still happen. So, you know, we're still prepping in the same neighborhood, which is so comforting and, you know, gives me something to do during quarantine. So
right.
lots of time to work out, which has been so fun.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm so excited to be on that journey again. This is my fourth year competing in the organization. It has truly shaped who I am as a young woman and has really given me the foundation to be in this line of work. It's something that I always wanted to do. I've always wanted to work with eating disorders, but I think it's really hard when there's a lot of influencers and professionals and just things that you're like, how in the world do I walk into a school and say, hey, I'm Melody Pierce, I want to speak to your kids? Like, where's the credit? And so throughout my journey in competition, I have continued to grow upon that. And it started out as I was Miss Tucson, and then I started my own business and have an LLC and got certified as a recovery coach. So every year there's been some sort of building block on top of that life goal of being able to pursue this full time. I think we all have such passion for what we do. These passion projects are, you know, something that really fuel us as young women, and that we don't just do this for the competition date. And I know that for you too. And so you're continually learning and growing through the organization on how you can make this a permanent, almost like a permanent job in your life, and how I can do advocacy far beyond my years as Miss Phoenix, Miss Arizona, whatever it is. And yeah, that's just a really big reason why I'm involved. And I'm so incredibly passionate about what I do. And I guess some other fun things to know about me are I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. So if you ever on Star Wars, I'm your girl. I know way too much about it. Let's see. Big sweet tooth, definite sweet tooth.
Yes.
My biggest weakness, but also my biggest power. Yeah, I mean, I think that those are like my big top facts.
Very nice. I've never seen Star Wars, so maybe I need to get in on that. Never. I know a little bit about them. Like there's 6 movies, I think.
I'm getting there.
It's kind of, well, I know that they came out in a weird order, and like, it's a series that I've heard a lot of wonderful things about, but have not seen yet. So maybe that's something I can do in quarantine.
Exactly. You'll have some time to get through the Star Wars.
Definitely. So going back to you starting a career essentially out of your social impact initiative, why don't you tell the listeners, I already know this stuff, but why don't you tell the listeners the name of your social impact initiative and kind of your story as to how that came to be, whether it ties directly to you or somebody you know, and just what was your inspiration behind all of that?
My social impact initiative is Steps Toward Eating Disorder Recovery and Awareness. And STEPS is an acronym that stands for Support, Talk, Educate, Prepare, and Strengthen. So those are tangible little nuggets that I take in when I speak to schools, when I speak to community members, Girl Scout troops, whatever it might be. That's a very clear point A to point B guideline of how someone can get involved with the recovery of eating disorders and the body acceptance of those around us. So that's kind of how I developed that model. It literally came to me in like the middle of the night one night. I was like, yes, this. I mean, there's no grand story behind it. My brain just was like, this is it. So I was able to develop that program. And in turn, I was like, okay, how do I grow upon this? This is my social impact. I have this acronym. This is my, speaking template. What do I do now? And so I thought my first step would be to get a curriculum into our schools. So I worked with the Washington School District here in Arizona and their curriculum writers, and we kind of teamed up to figure out where a curriculum could fit for our teachers because they're obviously incredibly overwhelmed. And I don't want to put more on them than they necessarily need. So I developed this, and this can also be used for after-school programs, church groups. Like, it is a curriculum that is ever-evolving, ever-changing, and can really adapt to whatever group it's needed for. And one of my favorite activities is there's one where you have to write out your selfie. So it's like creating your own selfie. So this is for
cool.
Our 3rd through 5th graders-ish. And where they have to draw out their own selfie and be able to attach their emotions to it and just have that mental, emotional component, which I think is so incredibly important to learn from a young age, to grow into. And so that's one part of my overall steps. And then after I created the curriculum, I was like, okay, what's next? I love the impact that this is having. I love the trajectory that this is going. What can I do now? And so then I decided to become a coach. And I had been coached by so many incredible people through my time in recovery. And I just knew that our community needed something like that. I went to school at Arizona State University at the time, and I just saw such a need for a leader who could articulate what people were going through, how they could help themselves, how they could be accountable. So a coach is really cool because you're kind of that middle sandwich piece to a therapist and a nutritionist for someone's eating disorder team. So I'm the person that you could text at 2 a.m. if you're having a hard time. I'm the person that, can send you some inspiration. I go to lunch with clients if they're like, I really want to try going out to a restaurant today. I can go with them, or going to the gym for the first time, things like that. Us as people either who have recovered or just haven't ever experienced these things, we don't think of that as a big deal. Mm-hmm. But, when you have fought for your life through an eating disorder, or you have gone through something so traumatic as to hate your body, that those little wins are so huge. And I think we just need more celebrating of that, which is why I just love being a coach, because I just get to celebrate people and I get to help them. And it's been such an honor to do the work that I do. And I've been able to help people from all sorts of states and, Arizona and whatever. And that's just been such a blessing. So I adopted, though, when I started coaching, I did a training program that taught me how to be a coach and everything like that, got certified and, went through all those quote unquote steps, not intended. And then I was like, okay, how do I put my steps program into my coaching? And then I was able to kind of work out a program where support, talk, educate, prepare, and strengthen is also an active component in my coaching rhetoric. So it's been amazing to see something that started as a social impact initiative, that started as a platform, to then evolve into all these different assets of my life and take on these new hats. So it's been really, really cool.
That is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I did not realize that that was all that being a coach entailed. And it's almost like I think of like AA and having a sponsor. Like you are the sponsor for somebody going through an eating disorder. And I think that is really cool and really special because like, did you, I don't know if you went to therapy or anything when you were going through your eating disorder, but for me, that was my primary method of treatment. And like, if there had been that, like you said, that middle part of the sandwich that when I was having a bad day, I could have texted them or you go to the gym with them. That's so cool because that's something that's like terrifying for some people coming out of eating disorder recovery. So like, kudos to you. That is like the coolest thing I've ever heard. I love that. And it's also really cool to see people making a career out of their social impact initiative in the Miss America organization, like outside of eating disorder awareness and stuff like that, like seeing someone that had a passion in the Miss America organization carry that out into the rest of their life. I think that's just so, so cool. But going back a little bit before your social impact initiative was created, what was your eating disorder journey and your recovery journey like for you?
So I was diagnosed with an eating disorder at the age of 10, which I think for a lot of people, when you think about 10-year-olds, those are our third and fourth graders. And we don't think of them as being able to have almost the mental capacity for whatever reason of being able to feel those emotions and go through something as detrimental as an eating disorder. But they can. And I was the first testament to that. So my father actually had struggled with addiction my whole life. He was an alcoholic, and he ended up passing away when I was 10 years old. But I knew from that event to stay away from drugs and alcohol and all those things. I knew that there was an addict in my family. I knew what to do. And so my mom and I always felt really prepared that, as long as I stay away from drugs and alcohol and like these addictive substances, that I was going to be okay. But we had no idea that addiction can be present in the form of an eating disorder, that is just as equal as an addiction. And I don't even think that clicked for me until I was speaking on a panel a couple years ago with a bunch of people who were former addicts. And I was the only person that had a mental health addiction. And then everyone else was, drugs, alcohol, things like that. And he was describing her experience with addiction, and she was just saying, it's like this thing that's always in your head and it's a voice and blah, blah, blah. And she was talking about it, and I turned to her and I was like, oh my God, me too. Because I always had separated them for so long and thought, an eating disorder, while yes, it is addictive, it didn't feel the same for me. And I think that comes a lot because we see treatments as very different things. Like there's AA for alcoholism, and we're still kind of navigating what that looks like for eating disorder patients. So it was really interesting to me to have that conversation and to have that light bulb go off and be like, oh my gosh, that's an addiction too. Like what I went through was an addiction too, because we just don't really think of it like that. And that's no one's fault. But I think that was really interesting to then equate the fact that my father was an addict to me having those addictive tendencies, obviously never carrying them out through drugs and alcohol, but, my brain finding a different way to pursue that. And I mean, you can think the same thing for like sex addictions, things like that. So it's all along that same vein as an addiction that I just don't think is prevalently talked about.
Yeah. And that's actually really crazy. That was kind of a light bulb moment for me just now too. I've never thought of it that way. Like being able to compare it to something like alcoholism or drug abuse. Like I have history of that in my family too. And I was just sitting here, I was like, I've never thought of it that way. That's a really interesting way to look at it. And so I think going back to what you do for a living now, like that, like me comparing it to what you do to being a sponsor, like that even just like, that all just like made so much sense to me. Holy cow.
It all fits together and it's all one big puzzle. But I think, we just speak about eating disorders so differently. And I think even treatment teams We can be so differently that we don't make that connection naturally. And that's not a big deal, but I think it was something that was really helpful for me because I was able to see it as something that I'd already witnessed in my life and I had, had firsthand experience with, and just making that correlation to the fact that like, I thought that I was immune because I didn't touch drugs and alcohol. And then I wasn't. And so I think for parents to know that, especially for anyone with addictive histories in their family, I think for everyone to just make sure that they are aware that there are different forms of addiction is so important, and something that I really try to raise awareness for, just because you don't know where it's going to come from. We thought we had it figured out, but we didn't. So, and that was a crazy journey, and so I was diagnosed at 10. I didn't actually start getting help until I was about 16. And the catalyst to that was one of my classmates had actually died by suicide when I was 16. And his mom came to our school to speak to us about, pretty much how she was feeling. It was about 6 months after he had passed. Everything was still really raw. Like none of us I was a 16-year-old. I didn't know how to grieve really well besides the experience that I had with my father. So, it was incredibly traumatic for a lot of the kids. And so she came in to talk, and her biggest takeaway was a message that started with "You matter." And as a 16-year-old, that was all I needed. That was the only thing that I needed to hear in order to give me permission to get help. Because until that moment, I was convincing myself that I was okay. And mind you, I was still a straight A student. I was still involved in a ton of clubs and activities. I was dancing full time. Like there was nothing perceivably wrong from the outside. But the damage that I was doing on the inside was incredibly significant, which we came to find out later. But I thought everything was okay. I think eating disorder and people with eating disorders are very tricky. We know how to hide it. And so that gets really scary for people who are in the lives of people with eating disorders, because it's not something that's difficult. And it's something that almost our culture, especially with anorexia, which is what I was diagnosed with, I think our culture really feeds on weight loss and the stigma of skinny. And so, when you see a girl not eating, when you see a girl eating less, you're more often to praise that behavior or to say, oh my gosh, you look so good when a woman gets thinner. And those can be someone's, dying words, honestly. That's someone's eulogy right there. Like that can really send someone over the edge to compliment that behavior. So that's something also that I think is important, that we as a society turn away from complimenting people's appearances. And like, even with my friends, I'm like, you are so incredibly intelligent. Like that comment that you made is so intelligent. Like, I'm just so thankful to have such a bright brain in my life, or like your spirit is just infectious. Like there are other ways that we can compliment each other and that we can still be supportive and, there for each other without it having to deal with weight or the way that we look. Like even someone's nail color, like, oh my God, girl, your nails are so cute. Like that works too. Like, something fun that doesn't have to make someone feel like they need to follow a certain path for the rest of their life in order to be successful or praised. And I think that that's just a hole that we fall into as a whole, as a society. Anyways, back to my original point. So his mom came in and told us that we mattered. And I think that message just propelled me to get the help that I deserve. I sat there sobbing in the bleachers the whole time. My friends were like, what the heck is going on? Like, what in the world is happening? And so that night I did the bravest thing that I think any 16-year-old kid can do. And I went up to my mom and I was like, hey mom, like, this is what I've been doing. I need help. Like, I can't do this anymore. And she had no idea, like, which totally isn't her fault. Like, I was really tricky and really sneaky, and she had no clue that any of this was going on. And so the thing that's really difficult about mental health and mental health treatment is, number one, resourcing, funding. Like, there's just, unless you have the privilege of having health insurance, and that health insurance then covers things like eating disorder treatment, like it can just be so difficult to get that help. And that was something that we really ran into when we first started navigating that path. which is also another reason why I became a coach, because if someone is to come to me and say, hey, listen, like, I'm going through this, I can't afford a therapist, I can still provide resources that are free or so low cost that they're affordable and be able to help them through that. Because I think a lot of people just don't know where to turn. And that's entirely natural. Like, if someone came up to me and was like, hey, I'm going through a domestic violence situation, and I wasn't a title holder because I obviously know where to go now that I have sisters who have had platforms in that. But if someone originally had come up to me and said, hey, I'm going through this, I wouldn't know what to do. You know, it's not until you're really put in that situation that you create a game plan. And so that's kind of where we were left. And so we had to navigate entirely on our own, you know, just us as a team, and figure out how to get help. And that took different therapists, because my first therapist told my mom to write a will. And that was incredibly destructive to me, because I had such a fear of her passing away after my dad died, because she's all I have left. And so that was language that, although I know that she was thinking very logically, as a child, that got really scary for me, because that made it real. Like, okay, my mom actually could die, is what that said. And so we went through a lot of therapists, needless to say. And I think that people need to not be afraid to do, and you need to wait, and you need to find your fit and your perfect resource. And I know that there's someone out there for you, but it does get incredibly challenging when, let's say, you have Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance. Well, if they only have 2 therapists in your area and you don't mesh well with either of them, you know, that can be a really difficult conversation to have, and, you know, a difficult road to navigate. So I'm here to help people go through that as well, and find the right resources for them, and kind of see where we can all fit together, and to be that, once again, middle ground to navigating treatment. Because I know that when I went through that path, I was so lost, and just, it took a very long time for me to find a team that was a right fit for me. And, you know, I think that if we would have gotten a little bit of that time back, I would have recovered a little bit sooner. So just making sure that people have those resources and are able to find their right fit too.
Definitely. And you brought up so many good points. And this is something, when I was recording with another young lady the other day, that like switching therapists and being okay with doing that is so important, to let people know that that's okay. Because that's something I did too. I went through, I think, 2, and I was lucky enough that the second one that I went to, I walked in and just like, it's so silly. Like, the vibe that she had in her office let me know that I was going to work there. And I ended up staying with her for, I think, 5 years. And I'm really lucky in that way. But even switching that one time, it's hard. It's difficult. I almost felt like something was wrong with me, that like, this therapist that's supposed to be able to like quote unquote fix me, I walk in and I don't mesh with them. Like, I thought something was wrong with me, more so than what I already thought was wrong with me, and like all these things and reasons why I was going to therapy in the first place. And 2, like the access to the resources. Something that like you probably already know is that eating disorder inpatient treatment can cost like $6,000 a day, and it's not covered by insurance. And like, for me, I resonated with so much of what you said, because I was considered overweight when I was going through my eating disorder. And as I lost weight, people were rewarding me, and I was getting all this positive reinforcement from those people. And then when it came time, like, for me to probably go into inpatient treatment, because I had been so positively reinforced all those years, there was no option for me for inpatient treatment, because my family was like, we can't afford this. And like, we have really good insurance, and I've never been turned away from a medical anything in my entire life. And even since then, and that's the only thing that's never been covered by insurance. And that's so mind blowing to me, because if you don't get that help, like, you can die. Like, it's a very real mental and physical illness, and it can take your life away from you. And just the fact that some people that don't have access to those resources are pretty much denied a second chance at life is so heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, we all don't come from the same socioeconomic backgrounds. We all, you know, have to go through life with what we've got, and we have to pull up our bootstraps. But I don't think that should ever deny someone, like you said, the chance of living. And unfortunately, I see it happen every single day, where, you know, a family has a daughter or a son or a mother or a father, and they are really doing real harm to their bodies. Eating disorders are the deadliest mental illness. And real harm can come from this. And I personally, I had a heart defect for a really long time. I still get my blood checked all the time. There are things, and I've been in recovery now for 7 years. So you don't know how long these things can really hang on to you. And it's terrifying to see a loved one pass away from an eating disorder. I will say that I have had friends who I went to treatment with. I spoke at a young woman's, they did a fundraising dinner for their daughter who had passed away from an eating disorder. And they had photos of her in the hospital on this board. And they had photos of her before she had struggled with her eating disorder, and then photos of her in her final days in a hospital. And I truly think, I'm so thankful that I don't see that every day, and that I don't have to, witness that or deal with that, and that all of my clients have currently recovered or in recovery and are doing a great job. And that, I've been thankful to have a lot of friends who have seen that path too. But that moment for me was so real in knowing that could have been me, that could have been you, that could have been one of my friends. No one is immune to that road. That's the thing. Regardless of your avenue of treatment, regardless of, getting a handle on it now, it coming back when you're 35, no one is immune to that road because of who they are. And anyone can get there. And so just reminding myself of that, and the fact that this is such a serious illness that does have such serious complications is so important. And, it is a little scary, and I don't mean to put in scare tactics, because I don't think that scare tactics necessarily help people at all.
But it's the reality of the situation. And it's something that people don't talk about. So having you come on and say, this is how it is really, really important too. I don't think it's a scare tactic. It's you being real with people.
Exactly. It is scary and it is real. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people are like, oh, only thin white girls get eating disorders, or, people who come from a lot of money and it's a hobby, it's a pastime. No, this is a clinically significant mental illness. This is something that people have dedicated their entire lives work to in order to cure, solve, and or, promote the recovery of. So this isn't just a fad or a phase. And I think a lot of times people think that, and that's where a delay in treatment happens too, because a lot of family members, even mothers, fathers, they can see their daughter going through something like this. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's fine. She'll get over it. Well, what if she doesn't? And so we have to have that conversation, and we have to think about those things in order to take this seriously and be able to resource the treatment that we need. And it's out there, and there are people that'll help you regardless of where you're at socially, economically, anything. There are people that will help you in any city that you're at across this nation. And I know them. And I just think having hope in that, and having hope that regardless of where you're at in this journey, that there are people here for you who are willing to hold your hand and walk you through this, and that's okay. That's an okay place to be, and it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to not be okay for a little bit. And it's okay to really experience, your eating disorder and what treatment and what recovery feels like. And that it's so worth it at the end of the day. And I know that you and I can both attest to that, my worst days in recovery are better than my best days in dealing with an eating disorder. And I hear that all the time, that, it's not going to be easy, and it wasn't easy, but you can overcome it. And there are people here to help you. I think it's so important.
And that's really, you just hit the nail on the head with what the message of, food for thought is. Because if there had been people having this dialogue and an opportunity for me to stumble across it on Apple or Spotify or wherever it may be at age 12 or 15, it would have changed my entire life. And so for people like you to come out and say, I had to do the dirty work, and I had to go through those really bad days in order to get to the ones that I'm at now, is really, really important. And that alone can change the trajectory of someone's life.
Yeah. And I think it's also valid to know I still have bad days. And I still have to actively choose recovery. And it's not something that you just wake up and you're like, okay, I'm cured. Like, it's not like a cold, you know?
Right.
It's something that you have to put the work in for the rest of your life. And I know that can sound a little bit daunting for anyone going through this, but at the same time, like, there are days that I wake up and I don't have to think about it. And so it does get so much better and so much easier, but you really do have to almost surrender your ego and surrender your eating disorder, your whole active thought process that you know is not serving you well. You have to surrender that and be able to, you know, give into treatment and give into the people who are willing to help you. And that's not to say that relapse doesn't happen. I've relapsed. That's not to say that you don't still have bad days. I have bad days. And I'm incredibly successful. So, you know, even if you choose recovery and when you choose recovery, that, you know, crap's still going to happen and it's going to define you how you're going to get back up from that. And sometimes you're going to get back up a lot easier than others. And sometimes it's going to take a little bit more help. But once again, there are people here to help you. I never want anyone to think that just because you don't have money or you don't have health insurance or whatever it might be, that there aren't people that you can't get help. You can. And you matter. And that is something that, you know, pulled me out from my depths when I was struggling at 16 with someone coming in and saying, hey, you matter and you deserve to live an actual life. And then I did. Like, and that's the coolest thing. And that just, there are people here to help you regardless of where you're at. And regardless if you're struggling, like, even I see a lot of people, and I started a step series on my Instagram recently because quarantine, and I don't get to go talk to people. I don't get to go talk to anyone. So I just like need somewhere to like mind dump. And that's the thing also about me public speaking and like even being on this podcast, I don't ever plan what I'm going to say. I really believe in the fact that, you know, whatever is said that someone needs to hear. And I believe in, you know, God's plan to put this in the ears of someone who needs to hear it. So, but I started the STEPS program on my personal Instagram, and I've been talking about coping skills and, you know, different methods of eating disorders. And I just want you to know too, if you're listening to this, that eating disorders come in all shapes and sizes. Just because something fits a DSM-5 criteria of anorexia doesn't mean that that's the only anorexia. There are so many subtypes and groups and things like that you can have a real problem. You can have an eating disorder, even if that just means that you're skipping breakfast and feeling guilty about it. There are so many different ways that eating disorders can manifest, and I think that they are so prevalent in our society just because, once again, that's something that we really encourage for whatever reason. And so they can manifest in a lot of different ways. So even if you're like, oh my gosh, like mine's not as serious as that, like I don't need to go to inpatient, like whatever, it's still serious, and it's still something that you don't deserve to go through. Like, think about my best mental way to explain this is, think about if you got to wake up and you didn't think of food. Think about all the other things that you could think about. You could think about starting your own business. You could think about reading a really great book. You could think about starting a new art project. Like, think about the mental space that is taken up by the fear of gaining weight, or the fear of losing weight, or the fear of food, or whatever it might be, that you could replace with something positive and something that actually feeds and fuels you to be a really great, well-rounded, and incredible person in the society. So that has nothing to do with your weight. So that's kind of my biggest, you know, if you are going through that where you're like, well, I only think about it like a couple times a day, well, that's still something that you don't deserve to deal with. And that you can totally get rid of in your thought process, and that you can then replace with something so cool and so fun. So that's kind of my criteria for if you think that you are having body image issues or eating disorder issues, that you don't necessarily need to fit any sort of therapist like DSM-5 criteria, and that you have a problem if it's already taking up some of your mental space.
Definitely. That's so important for people to know too. Just kind of switching gears a little bit, just because I love talking to pageant people about pageant things. So you've been competing for a couple of years, which means that you would have competed in Miss America 1.0. I'm sure my listeners have heard me reiterate this a million times, but if you are new to the podcast, Miss America has gone through some changes over the last couple of years, and we've completely omitted a swimsuit. We've changed up evening gown into red carpet wear. A lot of like big changes like that have happened. And so for girls like you and myself that competed in the old way, you would have competed in swimsuit. As an eating disorder recovery advocate, did that affect you in a negative way, or did you kind of embrace swimsuit? What was your hot take on swimsuit?
It was actually a really positive experience for me. My biggest mental thought process, I guess, when it comes to pageantry is that if a judge is not willing to pick me at whatever size I am, that then this isn't an organization that I need to support. Mm-hmm. And I know that that sounds really harsh, but it's very true. And I won swimsuit at whatever size that I was. And it was never something where I was like, I can only eat kale, because like that would entirely go against everything that I believe in. And I have a healthy body, and I have, I'm so thankful to be recovered and everything like that. So it was never something where I was running towards the pursuit of an unhealthy goal while I was competing. So, and that was a decision that I had to make from day one. I down with my treatment team and say, hey, I want to do this. There's a swimsuit portion. Like, how do we feel about this? Like, it did take time for me to flesh out mentally how I was going to walk in to that situation. But at the end of the day, I think it was really healthy because it also let me reclaim my body. It allowed me to feel confident and like, granted, my first competition, I did not feel confident. And I was like, oh my God, I'm standing on stage in a swimsuit. This is like my underwear. Everyone can see me out.
Yes.
Kind of weird. But afterwards, once I was like, no, this is like my Victoria's Secret model moment. Like, I am just feeling it. Like, this is so much fun. Like, once you kind of just change your brain in understanding, like, and every coach that I ever had too, every director, they never told me that swimsuit was about my body. They always said swimsuit is one from the head up or from the neck up or whatever it was. And that was the entire perspective that I carried all through every swimsuit competition, because I was like, you're so right. Like, once again, if you're willing to not pick me to be Miss Phoenix or not pick me to be Miss Arizona because I have an actual body, that's your problem. Like, that's not my problem. And there's nothing that I'm going to do to change that. That is entirely a judge's problem. And I'm happy to say that that was never something that got in the way because I've had a very successful competition career, but that was a mindset that I definitely had to work towards and be comfortable with. And that took time for me to accept and adopt and, be okay with it. I don't think that that's necessarily something that can happen for every single woman who's had an eating disorder who's then going to compete. I think it can be really triggering. I think it can be really stressful. It can be really scary. So, I think it really depends on where you're at in your recovery and if that's even a challenge that you want to bring into your space. But it was for me, and it was something that I actually had so much fun doing and really got to accept and celebrate my body in that moment. And that's every single time I walked out on swimsuit, I was like, I'm celebrating 6 years of recovery right now. I'm celebrating the fact that I can walk, the fact that I can, strut myself on the stage, that I can smile and feel confident and, live in this moment. And that was actually so healing for me. But once again, I recognize that that's not everyone's fate. So
definitely.
And, even now without swimsuit, I'm excited that they got rid of swimsuit. I don't think it is a necessary phase of competition. I'm glad that it helped me and was able to, bring me joy in the time that it was here, but I don't think it is necessary. And I love that we are continuing to grow as an organization and be able to accept other women, because at the end of the day, if there's another woman like me out there who was like, I really wanted to compete, but I couldn't do swimsuit, the fact that those women can now be a part of this organization, who are strong leaders, who are, dreamers, the doers, the overachievers, like those women so deserve to be here. And if something like a swimsuit competition was holding them back, I'm so thankful that we got rid of it so that we can have those bright minds be a part of what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Everything you said, so much yes. Love it. And that really, my swimsuit experience was very similar to yours. And I know, like you said, like every time you compete in swimsuit, you're not going to necessarily have that I love this moment. But I think looking back, and like I say this all the time, I feel like my friends hear me say this literally all the time. If I can walk in a bikini in front of like 1,000 people, I can do anything. And that is something that I will take away from the Miss America organization for the rest of my life. Like if I go into a job interview and I'm scared, or if I go into like a first date and I'm scared, I'm like, this is nothing. I'm fully clothed and I'm not like on stage looking at 1,000 people. I'm just like having a conversation with somebody. And it's just, sorry, what?
No, I just think it's a really big like make or break moment for a lot of people where like when you walk on stage, you have to choose confidence.
Yes.
Like, in that moment, you can't be like, well, I kind of want to do this. Like you have to be, fully committed to being confident in that moment, or, it's maybe not for you and it's something that doesn't make you feel good and that you shouldn't participate in. And so I think the women who were able to find that like exhilarating, like 115% level of confidence, it really does help you, like you said, go through the rest of your life and think, okay, well, I stood on stage in a swimsuit in front of 1,000 people. So why am I beating myself up in the mirror right now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why am I taking the time to think that my body's not good enough when there were 1,000 people watching me and they all thought that my body was good enough? Like, no one there said that I wasn't good enough and that I didn't deserve to be there. Like, so it can give you that perspective too of thinking, regardless of my size, regardless of the way that I look, I was still valued. I was still applauded. I was still, ranked and scored, whatever. And that now I get to reflect on that and say, well, I'm still so worthy, and this body is so worthy of that applause and so worthy of that praise, because of what it's been through and because of what it can do. So
definitely. And I always like to, I don't think I've told the story on the podcast yet, but my first pageant I ever competed in, I was like 8 months out of recovery. Like I had finally considered myself like really surrendering to that recovery process. And I was at my heaviest weight ever when I competed. And this was in 2015. So the swimsuit era was like thriving in full effect. And in my interview, the judges asked me, if you could be doing anything else right now, what would you be doing? And I told them eating McDonald's breakfast. And yeah, I was 17. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just said the first thing that came to my mind. And as I was walking out of my interview, one of the judges looked at me and he was like, I want you to go get that breakfast. And I looked at him. I was like, yeah, I'm going to. So my mom picked me up after the interview and we went and did that. And long story short, like I ended up winning that local and it was so cool. Like the judge remembered that conversation. He was like, I hope you went and did it. And I hope you know that like you scored high in swimsuit. And that for me was like, it was such a good moment because he knew what I needed to hear, like regardless of if I had gone and eaten that, which I did, but like, I don't know, it was so, he had to have known someone that had gone through an eating disorder because the fact that I ate that like egg McMuffin at 10 o'clock in the morning, I was still thinking about at like 10 at night. And he just looked me in the eye and was like, girl, you won that pageant because you ate the egg McMuffin and because you walked out on that stage. And like, I don't know. I think when people think negatively about swimsuit in any kind of pageant or like Victoria's Secret fashion shows and things like that, like those moments are the ones that I always like to remind people of. Like I've won a swimsuit competition at every size and every weight I've been at in my life. And so what you said with like winning from the neck up, I think that's really important for people to know too.
It really is. And I think it's a lot about personality and about energy that you bring to the stage. That was at the end of the day, my main goal was to be super excited. And I was doing it to celebrate, like I said, my 7 years of recovery. That wasn't when every single girl was on that stage. And I think just each of us having that moment for ourselves and having people too. And I think that's something that's so important is seeing how organizations like this are evolving. And seeing the fact that judges aren't looking like that judge did tell you to eat an egg McMuffin and that judges aren't looking for, the perfect body. And instead they're looking for the perfect heart. And I think that's something that we have always prided ourselves in as an organization is that we are women who are leaders. We are women who are kind. Like there are so many things there that I would rather be than skinny, as I know most people would. And I think that that's what our judges look for, and that, I mean, at least I hope they do. And but I think that they do because I've been successful and I haven't been a size 0, you know? So just seeing the evolution of the fact that they're looking for young women who are confident in themselves, not cocky, also, you know, being able to, I don't know, just be a good leader, be a good person is the most important thing. And like I said, that's why swimsuit was one. That's why we have these conversations. That's why we compete. If I was competing, if I, after my first year, thought that this was a fitness competition and that the skinniest girl was the one who won all the time, I wouldn't be here today. You know, I would not associate myself with something that I thought, you know, was just an ever-changing losing goal for me, because like I said, I will never conform to that idea. So yeah, I just think that is such an important story, and I love that. And it does show, you know, that these judges aren't just here for appearance.
Yeah. And for the years of bad things I've heard about Miss America and the swimsuit competition and people asking me why I compete, like that's always a story I come back to, is like from the minute I entered this competition, like I was accepted for the way that I was, like hands down. And like, just, I don't know, I've always thought about that first, like winning that first local, like right out of the gate. A lot of people, including myself, did not expect, but like having those moments and like, I don't know, the Miss America organization and like moments like that really changed how I recovered and where my entire life went. And so when people say anything about swimsuit, I always just like to really go back to that story. I'm like, really? Would you expect this to be said in a Miss America interview?
Right? Exactly. And it's just changing that narrative. I think that some people are like, it's a pageant, which like, no, it's a competition. But also just, you know, telling people who we are, sharing our story, sharing our truths, I think helps people just get such a healthier perspective of what this organization is all about, and that it's not, I have never felt in any way that it's been a beauty contest.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Everything you said. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Oh my gosh. So my last couple of questions for you are just like, where can people find you on social media, things like that?
So get ready for a list. So you can find my Miss Phoenix at Miss Phoenix AZ on Instagram, and then on Facebook it's just Miss Phoenix. My business, Steps Recovery, is at steps_recovery on Instagram, and then it's Steps Recovery on Facebook. And then I also have a website. It's stepsrecoverycoach.com. So there you can find resources. You can find, you know, my contact information if you're interested in getting involved with a recovery coach, if you just need someone to chat with. Actually right now, so for the whole month of April and then continuing into the whole month of May, my services are free. So I don't know when this podcast will air, but you know, throughout quarantine, as long as I'm in quarantine and others are in quarantine, I don't think that it's fair to charge people for, you know, what I do, and that we all need a little bit of help right now. So my services are free going through this couple next months, just because I want to be here for you, and that's my top priority. And yeah, so that's my website, that's my Instagram. I think that covers it all. Yeah.
Perfect. And then for listeners, that will be linked to on Spotify and Apple Podcasts in the description, as well as on the Food for Thought pod _ Instagram too. And then lastly, do you just have any last little bits of food for thought for our listeners before I let you go today?
Yes. I just think, you know, it is so important to be authentically yourself in this world, and to really embrace whatever phase of life you're going through, for you to find peace and joy and happiness, and just to know that you deserve that. I think is so important, in that we all go through stuff. Life's never going to be easy, and it's never going to be perfect. But once again, it's how you come out from the fire that's going to determine who you are. But it's also the people who are going to hold your hands through that fire. And it's the people who are going to lift you up and guide you through, and, you know, make sure that you get to the other side. And I just hope that you know, as a listener, that you deserve that, and you deserve to feel like you mattered, and you deserve recovery, and you deserve bright days and sunshine and happiness and cartwheels and whatever. And that it's here for you, and it's a possibility, and that I'm so ready to help you in any way that you need. And I know, you know, so are all of us in this community, and that community really is something that is so special and so important. So know that you have community with us.
Oh yes. Mic drop moment. Oh my gosh, that was so good. I can't believe that you don't practice any of this beforehand, that you just can speak so eloquently, and seriously, everything that you've said I've been sitting here with goosebumps like this whole time. You are a gem. So I am gonna hang up this and then I'm gonna keep talking to you. So if it hangs up on you, I'm calling you back because I'm not done with you. All right, everyone. That was episode number 4 with Miss Phoenix, Arizona, 2020, Melody Pierce. Everything that she said, I know I said this a million times, but everything that she said was so eloquently put and so true. And so I hope that at the end of this episode, you're left feeling a little bit more hopeful in the midst of COVID-19, and that you know that you're not alone. There are resources out here to help you, and people like Melody and myself want to get those resources to you no matter what your financial situation looks like, what your socioeconomical situation looks like. We are here for you, and other people in this community are as well. So in the bio or description for this episode, you can find all of Melody's links and social media and website, as well as the National Eating Disorder Association hotline. So if you ever need that, those resources are there for you as well. Thank you so much for listening to episode 4 of the Food for Thought podcast. I will see you next week. Thank you.